Hi, this is Nancy Mills. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Lane County, and I'm here to give you a presentation on the state and local ballot measures for the upcoming election in November 2022. I should give you a little bit of background about the League of Women Voters. At this time of year, we basically wear two hats. We are providing voter education, and we also have advocacy. When we are doing voter education, which is what I'm doing today, my advocacy hat is in the closet. What I will be doing today is giving background on the different measures and telling you both pro and con views of the upcoming ballot measures. There's other information that is available to you. Let's begin with Vote 411, which you'll see at the corner of your screen. Vote 411 is essentially one-stop shopping for voting information. It begins with how do you register and includes information that will be on the ballot for your address. There at the state website for the League of Women Voters, so that would be LWVOR.org. You will find a voter's guide that contains the kind of information that I'll be giving you today, so that as you're filling out your ballot, if you want to check something on the ballot measure, you can go to that site and see what the League of Women Voters has to say about this in a balanced fashion. There's also information on the local League of Women Voters website. That is to say, League of Women Voters in Lane County, LWVLC.org. On that website, you will also find recordings of the various forums that have been held with candidates running for different offices, including the House districts that affect this area. So I encourage you to listen to not only the political ads that you see on TV, but also their comments in these forums. And so with that, I will begin talking about the ballot measures that you may see. And when I say you may see, some of the local ballot measures will not be on your ballot if you are not in the area that they are covering. So there are 4 ballot measures from the state, and I will talk about each one individually. The first is ballot measure 111, which says that the state must ensure affordable healthcare access balanced against the requirement to fund schools and essential services. The background on this measure is that it was referred to the voters by the state legislature, and it is a constitutional amendment. So the legislature referred this ballot measure with the language that you see to the voters. There is no information in here about how what legislation is going to arise from approval of this measure. It's a constitutional amendment, which means that it must be considered very carefully because constitutional amendments are very hard to change. So to keep that in mind as you think about this. So, as it says, it states that it's the obligation of the state to ensure that every resident of Oregon has access to cost-effective, clinically appropriate, and affordable health care as a fundamental right. This obligation must be balanced against the public interest in funding public schools and other essential services, and any remedy arising from an action brought against the state to enforce the provisions may not interfere with the balance described in this measure. So why are we getting this ballot measure? And the supporters of this measure, the measure that says that healthcare access is a right, say that Gaps in healthcare leave some people uninsured. Insurance is sometimes unaffordable. A lack of affordable healthcare hurts finances. It prevents people from going to work. The delay in care because of lack of insurance can result in larger medical bills. And I'd like to make one comment about these statements. And the comment is, we frequently see statements that make a lot of sense, that seem like they seem like they must be true. I suggest that you may want to do due diligence about any statement that you see at this time of the season, the election season, to make sure that the statement is correct. So I looked up whether delay in care because of lack of insurance can result in larger medical bills. And I found that there is research on this that says that this statement is a true statement. There was one piece of that evidence comes from an article in the Journal of Pediatrics, 2009. The Journal of Pediatrics is a peer-reviewed journal. It's a solid journal, and so that's information that I can place some trust in. So, what are opponents saying? Opponents saying that the state is promising health care it can't deliver. Government-controlled healthcare would degrade the quality of healthcare by limiting choice and by making patients wait. And a government-controlled healthcare system is unfeasible. So as we pick apart this bill, what are the sorts of questions that people might have? One of them is the tension between the need to support essential services like public schools and other essential services versus the need to provide health care. And so, as a little bit of evidence for what this means, the Oregon Health Authority says that there are only about 6% of all Oregonians who are uninsured. And what does that insurance include? Well, a lot of it has state and federal support. So, for example, the Oregon Health Care Plan is our Medicaid plan. There is state support, public and state support for the benefits that teachers have as part of their benefit package. There is federal and state support for the public employees. There are a number of people who are covered by Medicare. There are a number, and the balance of the people outside of the 6% who are uninsured are covered by private health insurance. So many of these services include copays by the individuals covered. But the point is that there is a lot of federal, state, and local money that goes into supporting healthcare. So the overall additional money may not be as bad as one might have thought if you were thinking we had to fund healthcare for everyone. A second question is, why is it in the Constitution? Because we always have concerns about unanticipated consequences when we make a change in the Constitution, because those changes are hard to undo, as I mentioned. Here, the legislature has no concrete plans, but will be required, if this passes, since it is an essential right, there will be the requirement that they fulfill this essential right. So, there are groups working on healthcare plans now. There have been groups working on healthcare plans for many years. So I think the hope is that considering this as a right will help give the healthcare movement a little bit greater emphasis. So this is measure 111. Ballot measure 112 removes the language allowing slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for crime, and also retains any alternatives to incarceration, such as community service or counseling and education. But community service might be seen as an alternative type of work. That those programs are not touched by this ballot measure. This ballot measure comes from the Senate or from the legislature as a referral, and as I said, amends the Constitution. So, what is the background for this? And you may be surprised to see that we have language like this in the Oregon State Constitution. We do, and so do 18 other states and the U.S. Constitution. So where did this language come from? Well, in the period of time between the 1850s and the 1890s, there were many constitutions contained slavery loophole language, which allowed former slave-owning states to re-enslave Black people by arresting them for minor offenses such as loitering and vagrancy, and then pushing them back into slavery. Now, it seems like we've certainly moved away from this, and the origin of this legislation comes from the actions of some students from Willamette University who are serving as legislative interns, who saw this language and were appalled and put together legislation that they submitted to the legislature in 2019. Now, legislation didn't get passed in 2019 because of walkouts, and so they resubmitted it in 2021, and at that time they had additional support from Jeff Merkley, and their legislation was passed, and it comes to you in the form of this Senate Joint Resolution 10. Now, the question then is, who supports this, or how is it supported? And the supporters say, we must rid the Oregon Constitution of the language of slavery. This is out of touch with our values. The measure doesn't affect existing programs. What do the opponents say? Well, the opponents say, be careful in amending the Constitution in terms of unanticipated consequences. They also say that since the language is in the federal Constitution, there's no point in removing it from the state Constitution. The argument against that is that while the federal Constitution trumps the state constitutions in areas in which they overlap, there are a number of state laws that would not be affected by the federal Constitution. And so this could certainly affect those without challenge. I also find it unlikely that the Supreme Court would be asked to hear a challenge to a law that prevented slavery as a punishment for crime, but you never know. And then the third objection is that there could be a loss in revenue from prison labor. So you're saying, what is the cost of employing a convict to do work? And a survey in 2017 of all of the states showed that Oregon wages for incarcerated folks ranged from 5 cents an hour to 47 cents an hour. So that's a bit below minimum wage. And the intent of changing this is also to to humanize the, I think is also to humanize the prisoner, to allow them to earn enough money so that when they finish their sentence, they're in a position to establish themselves in society. So it's to take the punitive aspect of slavery away from incarceration. So now, what comes next? This is ballot measure 113, which says that legislators with 10 unexcused absences from floor sessions are disqualified from holding their next term of office. This is an initiative petition, which means that it was presented and there were signatures that were obtained, enough signatures to put it on the ballot. It also amends the Constitution. And so let's talk a little bit about the background for this. So legislation passes with a 2/3 majority. That's what the requirement is for a quorum. And recently, the Republican minority has walked out to prevent votes on legislation. However, in 2001, the Democrats walked out to protest redistricting. So a walkout is not not seen in one party, it's seen as a tool of the minority. Now, the legislature has the power to discipline members for disorderly conduct, which gives you some sense of what was going on at the time the Constitution was written. And this measure looks at the discipline in the context of saying that 10 unexcused absences will result in being able from holding office in the next session. Now, what are the issues here? The issues partly are that that unexcused absences have not been defined by the legislature. The way that the legislature governs itself is to decide on the rules at the beginning of each session for each house. And the decisions about whether an absence is excused or not are made by the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate. And there is not a formal requirement that that there be an explanation of why the request was denied. So with that background, what do the supporters say? The supporters say something has to be done because since important legislation is being held hostage, and there needs to be a penalty for legislators who don't do their job. What do the opponents say? They say this is one of the few tools that's available to the minority party. They're concerned that the process puts too much power in the hands of the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House. And finally, there's the concern that amending the Constitution always carries with it the possibility of unanticipated consequences. So you might say, why not just change the quorum? It turns out that there are only a handful of states that have a quorum as large as 2/3, which is what Oregon has. Why not just make it a majority? And I saw an interview with a legislator who said that the concept of a quorum is challenging for many voters, but the idea that if you don't do your job, you have there are consequences is something that everyone understands. Now, who supports this? The support comes from a number of public sector unions, the Oregon Education Association, the OLCV, the ACLU, the AFL-CIO, the Oregon Center for Public Policy, the Rural Organizing Project. So a number of groups support this measure. There is no organized opposition. And the final of the 4 state measures is ballot measure 114, which is a reduction of Gun Violence Act. It requires a permit to acquire firearms. Police maintain permit and firearms database, criminally prohibits certain ammunition magazines. Now, there's a lot of pros on this slide, and I'm not going to read it to you as a book, but feel free to stop the recording so that you can read the information yourself and make sure that you've got some sense of what it covers. So, what is the background for this? Well, there's been an increase in gun ownership since 2020, which has been accompanied by a spike in overall gun violence, including homicide, violent crime, attempted suicide, and unintentional death and injury. 77% of Oregon gun deaths since 2020 have been suicides. This is 23 percentage points higher than the national average. It would be helpful for you to know what gun restrictions Oregon currently has. There is no permit required to obtain a gun. You don't have to have a permit or register a gun. There is no permit for open carry. You do have to have a permit for concealed carry for a handgun. There's a background check required for gun transfers. There's a red flag law allowing removal of firearms from those who pose a risk to themselves or others. There is a prohibition, there's a removal of firearms from dating partners in domestic abuse cases. There's a regulation that you must have safe storage of firearms. And there is the ability of certain jurisdictions to ban firearms, like colleges and universities. The minimum age for purchase of a long gun is 18. The minimum age for purchase of a handgun is 21. And minors can possess a firearm, if it's given by a parent or guardian. So, what does this contain? This requires a permit to purchase from a firearm from a gun dealer, an individual, or a gun show. There's a fee of $65 associated with it. There's the requirement for identification, a photo ID and a fingerprint. There's a criminal background check, and there's a requirement that you have no record of medical or domestic violence. The permit to purchase will be issued within 30 days if the requirements that I've just mentioned have been, along with, if the requirements, including an approved safety course, which I'll discuss in a minute. There's a requirement that the purchase will be issued within 30 days if those requirements have been met. And this is in comparison to jurisdictions which have a 3-day limit, and if the background check is not concluded within 3 days, you can go ahead and purchase a gun. There is a requirement that federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies will be informed if a permit is sought by someone who fails the background check. The permit doesn't limit the number of firearms a holder may purchase or acquire. Now, the applicants are required to complete an approved safety course, which is firearms law, safe firearm storage, accident prevention, and a hands-on demonstration of basic firearms handling and firing. The permit must be shown when purchasing, may be denied if the applicant is a danger to oneself or others. And finally, magazines over 10 rounds or readily modifiable to exceed 10 rounds would be prohibited, with some exceptions for current owners, inheritors, law enforcement, and armed services personnel. Let's look at how the law affects you if you have a magazine over 10 rounds and you're the owner. The owner's sole use is restricted to use on personal property or in shooting ranges, at competitions, or lawful recreational activities like hunting. The ballot measure also requires that when the magazine is transported to the locations I just mentioned, it must be transported in a locked container, which is separate from any firearm. And finally, the violations are misdemeanors. So, what do the supporters say? The supporters say that studies have shown that permits to purchase reduce firearm-related injuries and death, and studies have further shown that firearm ownership or access to firearms triples the risk of suicide and doubles the risk of homicide when compared to someone who does not have access. They say that these restrictions are common sense restrictions. There are the restrictions on high-capacity magazines during the 10-year federal ban from 1994 to 2004, excuse me, and the ban in over 9 states and the District of Columbia have been found to reduce the number of fatalities and injuries in shooting incidents. Opponents, they say that this erodes Second Amendment rights, that one-size-fits-all training is not appropriate. There's a subjective mental health review, the permitting process is cumbersome, and criminals will continue to get firearms illegally. They also express concern that the greatest effect is on low-income families because of the cost of the permit, which will leave vulnerable populations unable to defend themselves when crime is skyrocketing. Some police departments and sheriff's offices have agreed that complying with this will be either exorbitantly expensive or impossible. They won't be offering training. And I have a comment about their responsibility for hiring training or for providing this firearms training. The ballot measure, which is 14 pages long and and is very detailed, says that an approved safety course can be offered by law enforcement, a community college, a private or public institution or organization or firearms training school utilizing instructors certified by a law enforcement agency, and that if you have proof of completion of any law enforcement firearms training course or class that's offered for security guards, investigators, reserve law enforcement officers, or any other law enforcement officers, that satisfies to fulfill the requirement for firearms training. And as of 2024, 14 states and Washington, D.C. have enacted permit to purchase laws that vary by type of license and firearm purchased. 9 states and Washington, D.C. have enacted laws banning magazines capable of holding a certain number of rounds. This measure is, the campaign for this measure is led by Lift Every Voice Oregon, which is a faith-based organization. The opposition comes from the National Rifle Association. So this does not amend the Constitution, which means that if the ballot measure passes, then the language will be sent to the legislature so that they can modify the language as necessary to make laws that don't conflict with existing laws, for example. Okay, we have finished the state ballot measures, so let's turn our attention to the local measures. And what I've done is to begin by listing the local measures by location so that you can orient yourself to the ones that might be of interest to you. Everyone is covered by the Lane County measure, ballot measure 335, whose purpose is investment in county parks, water access, and restoration of natural areas. Eugene folks will be interested in ballot measure 2333, which funds street repair and walking, biking, safety, and tree projects. And this is a renewable levy. Springfield has ballot measure 2327, which renews a 5-year local option levy for jail and police services. And the Rainbow Water District, which serves areas that are in northern and western Springfield that are annexed, with ballot measure 2331, which is a renewal of the 5-year fire protection local option levy. Then further afield, the Upper McKenzie Rural Fire Protection District has ballot measure 2334, whose purpose is to renew the local option levy for fire and EMS operations. Coburg, with ballot measure 2336, is asking for approval of their updated charter for the city. And then there are a set of psilocybin ban measures from Dune City, Junction City, Cottage Grove, which prohibit psilocybin-related businesses, and Coburg, which puts a temporary ban on psilocybin service centers. So our first measure is the Lane County ballot measure 2335, whose purpose is investment in the county parks, water access, restoration of natural areas, by a levy of 16 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation for 5 years. So what is the background in this? The background is that prior to this request for a levy, the funding that was received by the county parks, and we should mention that the county is the size of Rhode Island. The funding for this was received came from user fees and from a small amount of money from taxes on visitors. And it was insufficient, as you can tell by going to the parks. What they are asking for is a levy that for 5 years will return enough money to make a substantial dent in the problems that one sees in the parks that are listed on on your screen. The levy funds would be placed in a restricted special fund, and an annual independent financial audit of the levy spending would be required. There's an estimate of around $25 million in deferred maintenance. And they had an external consultant study the situation in the park, and this measure was designed with the consultant's aid. So, let's see. The estimated tax rate is 16 cents, as I said, per $1,000 of assessed valuation. That means that the median Lane County homeowner is estimated to pay an average of $38 per year for 5 years. This is indeed an additional tax, but it's not a particularly large tax. So what I wanted to do with this slide was not only give you information about the magnitude of the levy, but to give you some context for understanding the levies that might be assessed in subsequent measures. So if you go to the URL that I have shown there, or if you just Google Lane County Assessor Tax Information, property search, and then look at property search, you will get to slides like the one that I've shown here. The importance of this slide is that the blue line is what you're reading about in the newspaper about the increases in housing prices. This is not my house. This is the house of a neighbor. And the red line is the assessed value of your house, which is limited to 3%. So it only goes up a little bit. It's this number that any levies are based upon. So if your house has suddenly become a $500,000 house, odds are your tax base is more like 200,000. So a small reality check. Now, as I said, this is a new tax. The city of Eugene is interested in passing ballot measure 20333, whose purpose is to fund street repair, walking and biking and safety and tree projects. Okay, so this is a renewal of a levy. It is not a new tax. And the background of this is that it's the fourth bond measure seeking funding for street repairs. At the time of the first vote in 2008, the estimated backlog to repair city streets was $280 million over 10 years. The passage of this bond measures in 2008, 2012, and 2017 has cut that backlog by more than half, with the current estimated cost to be about $86 million. According to a recent pavement management report, about $15.4 million is needed per year over the next decade to return all streets to good condition and keep any additional streets from needing to be reconstructed. Once this is achieved, it's currently estimated that the annual street repair budget would be about $11 million. Now, only certain streets are eligible for this, and to get more information about what those streets are and how this money is going to be spent, I direct you to Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. That's the best website and look for our work, and then look under that for bonds. There you'll get history of the bond measures, and it will also give you access to Council Resolution 5364, which will tell you exactly which streets are designated for repair, and will also give you information about walking, biking, safety, and street projects. So basically, they'll repair the streets that they are planning to repair. If there's some extra money, they'll see if there are other streets, and they will also ask for proposals for improving walking and biking, and safety concerns, and street tree projects. So what are the arguments for a yes vote? Because the 2022 measure continues the same tax rate as previous measures. The tax rate a person pays in taxes does not increase. The previous street measures have street ballot measures have cut the backlog of street repairs by over 50%, so they're clearly working. The arguments for a no vote are that even if the tax rate is no higher than it has been in the past, this is yet another tax which is hard for folks on a fixed income. We have many more important problems that we should be spending tax money on. So next, for Springfield. Springfield is looking for passage of 327, and it's again a renewal of a local option levy, and this one covers jail and police services. So the question is, so the proposal is that there will be a levy at the same size that wasn't passed, which will cover the services for jail operations and police services. So what specifically is covered? At the current time, the levy funds police services, which is funding for 8 police officers, 5 dispatchers, 5 community service officers, and 2 records and communication specialists. It provides 100% of the funding for the jail and its 19 employees. For the municipal court, 2 full-time employees and additional judge hours are covered. And the city prosecutor, the city prosecutor gets additional funding to help with increased service demands. So and this new levy will continue to provide funding for uniformed officers, community service officers, the municipal court, and the prosecutor's office, among other items, as well as fully funding the municipal jail. The levy has the support of the city council, and a survey of several hundred citizens also showed support for the measure. What are the arguments in support of the measure? The police are doing a good job in reducing crime. Because the levy rate is the same as the previous rate, it is not a tax increase. Arguments against will be familiar. This is yet another tax, which is hard for folks on a fixed income. We have so many more important problems that we should be spending tax money on. The next Springfield-related proposal is for the Rainbow Water District, and that serves areas in northern and western Springfield, primarily north of Hayden Bridge Road and west of Aspen Street, that aren't annexed into the city. So this is ballot measure 2331, and it's the renewal of the 5-year fire protection local option levy. So, well, this is the Rainbow Water District. It also covers fire and fire protection. And so this is a renewal of the contract that Rainbow has with the Eugene Springfield Fire for fire protection services. This renews a measure passed in 2017, which expires in 2024. If it's required for the continuing provision of fire and emergency services. So as I said, the rate remains the same. Next is further afield is the Upper McKenzie Rural Fire District, which is ballot measure 2334. And the purpose of this is it's a renewal of the local option levy for fire and EMS operations. This is not a tax increase because it renews the existing levy. The Upper McKenzie Rural Fire Protection District operates with dedicated volunteers covering 6 square miles of the McKenzie Valley, plus about 600 square miles outside the district. And you can read the rest of that. As they say in their discussion, the McKenzie Fire and Rescue Fire District protects 45 miles of Oregon's McKenzie River between Springfield and Blue River. Our staff and volunteers are proud of our mission to prevent, protect, and preserve life and property from loss by fire, accident, sudden illness, or disaster in the community. Further, to enhance the quality of life and to minimize suffering wherever possible. As is well known, this fire district was heavily impacted by the Holiday Farm fire in 2020. Now, I was curious about this because since rebuilding in the McKenzie area has been slow, I wondered where the revenue is going to come from. And so because of so I researched it. Because of lost property values, the state's providing funds to reimburse those lost property tax revenues. In 2022, $86,732 will go to the Upper McKenzie Rural Fire Protection District for taxes, as well as $36,286 for their local option in 2022. This is part of a $23.2 million reimbursement to counties for lost tax revenues. The rate requested in the levy is the same as in 2017. At that time, The estimated revenue was $77,300 for 2022. In the ballot measure, the revenue for 2023 is $71,500, which is down from the pre-fire estimate for the previous year by about 8%. So, while they won't be able to generate as much money now as they would have before the fire in terms of tax revenues, the state is helping to make them whole. City of Coburg, they were working from a 1992 charter, and since that time things have changed. They have redefined positions. They have changed certain of their methods of operating, and their charter had needed to be modernized. And so the city manager worked with the city council to modernize the charter. And what they ended up doing was to use the League of Oregon Cities 2018 model charter as the starting point for making their changes. Among other things, as it says, the proposed charter will add the city administrator as an officer, clarify the responsibilities of the officers of the city, update the responsibilities of the mayor and council, update how vacancies are filled, and clarify what consists of a quorum. I listened to some of the discussions in the Coburg City Council about this revision, and they appear to be a remarkably well-run council with a very effective city administrator. And so now we move to the psilocybin bans, and I showed the language for the Dune City measure. The measures for Junction City and Cottage Grove are basically the same. So, with the passage of the measure that created psilocybin, the psilocybin program in Oregon, was the provision that cities and counties could opt out of providing psilocybin related businesses. So these 3 cities are going to ban the development of psilocybin related businesses within their city limits. Coburg is doing a temporary ban on psilocybin service centers and manufacturing products. So they have the option of waiting a couple of years to see how the process works, so that rather than leaping in. So that's the difference in their ballot measure. Now, let's go back to what the ballot measure that was passed in 2020 did. So Oregon became the first state in the nation to legalize the therapeutic supervised use of psilocybin after 56% of voters approved ballot measure 109. And psilocybin is the active hallucinogenic ingredient in what are commonly referred to as magic mushrooms. But the measure allows cities and counties to opt out of the program if their constituents vote to do so. And that's the basis for these ballot measures. But there are consequences. There are consequences to this. For example, people considering training to become facilitators may spend thousands of dollars for training, but they need to know what to do if their county opts out. So if their county is not going to provide, their county or city is not going to provide this psilocybin, these psilocybin centers, then they don't want to spend money on the training. So this is not a Lane County exclusive situation. So as of September 2nd, 2023, the following counties added permanent or temporary bans to the November ballot: Clackamas, Umatilla, Jackson, Crook, unincorporated Deschutes County, unincorporated Coos County, Klamath, unincorporated Clatsop County, unincorporated Morrow County, and unincorporated Douglas County. And there were also bans proposed to the voters in cities, which includes Brownsville, Philomath, Eagle Point, Central Point, Shady Cove, Phoenix, Rogue River, Banks, Cornelius, St. Helens, Newburgh, McMinnville, Lapine, Estacia, and I may have mispronounced that. I apologize. I'm not a native Oregonian. Sandy, Molalla, Boardman, Heppner, Ione, Winston, Canyonville, Oakland, Glendale, Drain, Myrtle Creek, Reedsport, Sutherland, Riddle, Elkton, and Roseburg. There, the vote is not for a ban, but for allowing the businesses. If it fails, there will be a ban. And Prineville. So this is the way people are approaching psilocybin. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.